Hello, my name is David Wortley. I'm the CEO and founder of 360 in 360 Immersive Experiences. Today, I want to talk about the second part of a series of talks on the future of technology and humanity. So I'm going to go straight into the presentation, and so this is what we're talking about. It's part two of a series of presentations on the future of technology on humanity, and it concerns the future of transportation technologies. And what I want to do during this 1 hour session is to answer some questions. The first of these is quite important. What is the aim of these talks on technology and humanity? Why should I be interested in sharing my thoughts and ideas on how technology and humanity intersect? Who am I addressing these talks to? Who's my target audience? And in the case of transportation technology, what is actually driving the developments in transportation technology? We've had some remarkably revolutionary changes in my lifetime, but what is behind all of these developments? And how has transportation technology evolved over history? What are we going to be seeing in the future of transportation technology? And what's the impact of transportation technology on humanity? And why should this be of interest to all of us? Well, the roadmap for this series of presentations is based on a book that I wrote in 2012. The book is called Gadgets to God. I thought long and hard about the title for this book. I didn't want to give the impression that it was a religious tome, but I did want to give the idea that our relationship had changed during my lifetime, our relationship with technology. So this is part two. I'm talking about transportation technology, and you'll see on the right there a list of all the other areas where I believe technology has had a profound impact in my lifetime and has some relevance to the future of humanity. So I'm going to be exploring our changing relationship with technology. Now, I was born in 1949. You can see me there as a baby with my mother and father. And although my journey in life is not yet finished, I know where my destination will be, and it will be in a graveyard. I'm hoping that during the rest of my lifetime, I can make some sort of contribution. In other words, I don't consider that at the age of 71, my life's journey is over. And it's always been my philosophy that it's much better to travel hopefully than to arrive. And certainly when it comes to the end point of my life, I would rather be continuing to travel hopefully as long as I can. But the whole point of these exercises is to look at how our relationship with technology has changed profoundly in my lifetime. Now, when I was growing up as a child, like this picture of the little girl, I used to kneel at the end of my bed and say my prayers. And it was my relationship with God and my belief that there's an all-seeing, all-powerful being that is watching over me, knows what's going on inside my heart. And so I communed with my God as a child, and it played a big part in the development of my life. Now, of course, we have technology, and we have technology that has a lot of the attributes that we ascribe to an all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipotent being, especially with cloud technology and artificial intelligence. We spend much more time these days typically communing with technology than we do with whoever our God might be. So it's important to think about whose hand is the future in. Is it God, or is it in our own hands, or is it something else? So I'm looking at it from the perspective of a baby boomer. I consider myself the part of the most fortunate generation in history. I didn't look quite like this as a teenager in the 1960s, but I certainly was one of the flower children of that era. And so I see things from the perspective of my experience growing up from the year 1949 and living through the remarkable changes that have happened during the 70 years of my life. But my ideal traveling companions on this journey through the relationship with technology and humanity are ideally people of my own generation, because they will be able to identify with my experiences, and what I have to say may be tinged with nostalgia, and certainly will be, for most people, certainly a shared experience. But I also want to address my talks to the next generation, the youngest people in our society, because these are fresh minds and they will have different perspectives. They have not lived through the period of history that I've lived through. And so they are being born into a world which is completely different from the world that I was born into. And these profound changes between life in one generation and the next, and the exponential changes that have occurred, are very important to identify. And finally, I want to address futurologists. I want to talk about my experience from the perspective of futurologists who may have their own views and opinions on where we're going with technology and society. So these are my ideal traveling companions, and whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching a recorded version, I hope if you're in any one of these categories that you will get something out of this series of talks. So it's important to recognize that I believe that throughout history, mankind in general has strived in a quest for control over the world that they live in. So we human beings have sought to master the physical constraints of time and space. We've not been satisfied with our immediate environment in terms of where we are in the present. And so for centuries, we've tried to harness the power of other entities to overcome our physical limitations, and try to take this journey that overcomes some of the barriers of traveling through time and space. So in my lifetime, we've gone from the latest generation of steam locomotives, and the locomotive that you see on the left is actually younger than me. It came out of the works in Eastleigh, I think in 1951, and it was the latest generation of locomotive, more reliable than previous generations, and had the latest technology built into that steam engine. And looking back, it seems incredible that in these 70 years, we've gone from that technology to the latest technology, which has been able to land a rover safely on the surface of a planet millions of miles away from our own planet. So looking back at the past of transport technology and the impact that these technologies have had on civilization, we can go back to the Egyptian times and the construction of the pyramids. And this was only possible because they discovered the wheel, and they also had ship transportation technology to be able to get the raw materials to construct the pyramids. And without tree trunks to roll the stone that comprise the pyramids, that would have been beyond the capabilities of individual human beings. And so the Egyptian civilization was very much built on control over transportation technologies. And the same is true of the Romans. The Roman roads were fundamental to their ability to develop and manage a massive empire. Of course, they had other technologies as well, but it was essentially the transportation technologies and the roads that gave them the power. And then, of course, we had the Vikings and marine power. Marine technologies have also played a very important part in history in the development of civilization and the transfer of cultures from one part of the world to another. And moving forward in time, the canals had a profound effect on the Industrial Revolution. And then, of course, steam power came along with Stephenson's rocket. And the early adopters of these technologies were able to build empires and expand their influence around the world. And as we move into the 20th century, we can see technology began to accelerate in its development, and we have motor cars, we have the early flight with the Wright brothers, and then we had commercial transport like the Zeppelins, like the Hindenburg there, capable of transporting significant numbers of people, larger numbers of people through the air. And in more recent times, the invention of the jet engine and its ability to power and transport people by air in shorter timescales was another quantum leap. Till in 1969, of course, we were able to put a man on another body in space, first man on the moon in 1969. And I do remember watching that live. I was at a place called Stone in Staffordshire on a training course for post-switch telecommunications, and I actually watched the moon landing on a black and white television in a recreation room, along with loads of other people who were totally transfigured by this remarkable achievement. So human beings have always been trying to go beyond the bounds and constraints of their own physical power and their capabilities. And so they've harnessed other entities. And of course, it began by harnessing the power of living creatures who maybe had greater strength and greater speed than ourselves. And so human beings domesticated animals, and they leveraged the power of these animals to be able to achieve much more than they could through their own individual physical capabilities. And in many ways, the early transportation technologies, such as the steam traction engine you see there and the Ford Model T Ford motor car you see on the right, almost had personalities of their own. And like human beings, these transportation technologies were fundamentally flawed. They weren't 100% reliable, and so they relied on human experience, skill, and ingenuity to work together with machines to achieve what they could achieve. And so as we move into the 1840s, we begin to see the consumerization of transport. And the picture on the screen there is of Thomas Cook, who's one of my, I suppose, he's one of my heroes, because not because of what he achieved in setting up his travel empire, but because of what he achieved as a humanitarian and social entrepreneur. And it was Thomas Cook's belief that the latest transport technology of his day in the 1840s, which was the rapidly expanding railway network, could be harnessed to enrich the lives of ordinary people. And in his case, he hoped that it would lead ordinary people to new experiences and interests that went beyond getting drunk in the pub at night. And so his vision was that by making transport attractive, accessible and affordable through the railway network and later through a combination of sea travel, railways and other forms of transportation, he totally enriched the lives of ordinary people, and the effects of his work are still felt today. And of course, this continued into the 20th century with Henry Ford, and he popularized the Model T Ford, which for the first time made it possible and affordable for the man in the street to think about having their own transport, which would take them to places that they would otherwise not be able to reach without access to public transport. And a friend of mine, Chris Blakey, he bought a motor car called the Austin 7, which was the embodiment of the early days of consumer transport technology. The Austin 7 was built not only to be affordable by the man in the street, it was also built to be able to be maintained and looked after, simply enough for the ordinary person to be able to manage without expert help. So I've been on a 70-year journey in my life, and this journey has seen changes in the speed, the power of these transport technologies, the accessibility, the affordability, and also the control. And it's not been an incremental change, it's been a quantum change. And it's transformed life from when I was a baby, where the only really affordable transport for the majority of people was public transport by diesel engine buses. And it was only in my early days that you started to see transport, personal transportation technology being available. And of course, we've gone in my lifetime to being from a situation where these technologies like steam train required skilled services of a driver and a fireman to be able to operate, to the days today where Docklands Railway doesn't have a driver or need a driver. And so we have the same kind of 70-year journey with the motor transport or the automotive industry. We've seen the same kind of quantum changes and the consumerization of transport technology that makes it affordable and gives more control to the man in the street. So we've gone from the days of the Humber Snipe, which is the car that you see in the middle, and that's the one that used to take me and my uncle and auntie and my mum and dad and my cousins on holiday every year, and for the occasional trips to the seaside at the weekends. And we've moved in my lifetime to the kind of driverless technology, robot cars that you see on the right-hand side. So looking in particular at the impact of changes in technology on motor vehicles, here are a couple of cars. The car on the left is an MG sports car from the 1950s that was owned by my partner. And the car on the right is the one that I drive now. It's a little mini convertible. So what kind of changes in technology have we seen over this period, and how has that affected our relationship with the cars that we drive? And going back to my childhood, we had a very strong relationship with the Humber Snipe that my uncle owned, and we used to call it the Bomb. And my partner's car, the MG sports car, was called Maggie. Cars had names and they had personalities. They were flawed like human beings. But do we have the same kind of relationship with the cars that we own today? And so what's been the impact of technology on our relationship with these vehicles, and also the reliance of other people to be able to get the best out of these transport technologies. So before data technology, certainly in the days of Maggie, days of the Humber Snipe, the bomb, we used our human skills to get the best from these vehicles, and we were supported by knowledge professionals. And because of the limitations of manufacturing technology in those days, and the technology that went under the hood or inside the steam engine, the lack of reliability of these technologies led to more breakdowns and a reliance on garages and mechanics, knowledge professionals to diagnose problems, maintain and repair. But what we've seen in my lifetime is the consumerization of digital technology. And we've seen technology in the early days developed as proprietary technologies that are designed specifically for a particular professional, and they were mainly only used by professionals. And so over the period of my lifetime, technology has gone from being dumb and unconnected and proprietary to being generic, smart, and connected. And it's gone from technologies that are only the domain of professionals, rich people, people with a lot of knowledge and experience, to technologies like our smartphones that are in the hands of literally millions and millions of people around the world. And in fact, I believe that there are more mobile phones on the planet than there are human beings. So over the period of my lifetime, what we've seen is the use of digital technologies to be able to measure information and visualize that information to provide feedback to the owner or the driver of the vehicles. So modern cars tell us all of these things. They warn us of impending problems, and in modern times, they very often correct those problems themselves because they have intelligence built in to be able to do that. And in addition to be able to monitor the condition of the vehicle, they are also able to know where that vehicle is and can tell us how to get to our destination and compute new routes if we go off track. So the modern cars and smartphones are able to advise us on the best route to our chosen destination. So here is an example of how transportation technologies are basically adding a quantum change in our ability to be able to control our journey from A to B. And not only control our journey, but also the reliability of our journey. So we've gone from an analog world that you see on the dashboard on the left into a digital world. And what are the technologies involved in this transition? And what's all this got to do with humanity? What does it actually mean for our future as human beings? Well, if we look at what Thomas Cook's aspiration was in the 1840s, he wanted to make exploration of new experiences and new places available to everyone. And so he wanted to use technology to empower people. And in my lifetime, we've gone to a situation where the technologies that are embodied into vehicles like the car that you see on the right, the Fiat. In fact, I had a Fiat exactly like that. And what that Fiat brought to my life was a level of reliability that previous cars didn't have. But they also, for me as a human being, gave me freedom. It gave me independence to be able to drive where I wanted to drive. They gave me control over where I wanted to go. And they also provided me with entertainment within the vehicles. And in fact, in my little Fiat, I was able to talk to the car and tell it to dial someone on my contact list. So over those years, and I had bought my little Fiat in probably around about 2009. So it's about 10 or so years ago. And so over my lifetime, this technology has not only been more attractive, they've become increasingly attractive, but they've also become more and more affordable and more accessible to ordinary people. And so if we look at other transportation technologies, and you look at the drone, for example, now the drone cannot carry my weight or transport my weight or any goods. But the one on the left-hand side is one of my drones. It's called a DJI Mini 2. But what it allows me to do is to be able to travel to places and get views of places that I could not otherwise get by myself. So if I click, you'll be able to see the video playing on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is an aerial view of a village called Grafton Regis, which has a remarkable history. And I am controlling the drone that is videoing this image. And so it's a remarkable thing that we are now not only able to drive from A to B, we can also remotely control other devices that can give us views and take us to experiences which we would not in any event be able to enjoy by ourselves, except possibly for hiring a helicopter or learning to fly a helicopter. So here's some of the technologies that are key to the way in which transportation technologies have developed. There are sensor technologies built into cars, trains, everything that we see around us. They use wireless communications like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and wireless broadband. They have increasingly powerful computer processors, and they are able now to recognize our voice, which gives us human beings control via speech. They are able to display data in a way that assists our understanding and gives us more insight and control, again, for ourselves. But nowadays, we have a new kid on the block, relatively new kid on the block, called artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is not only something that potentially a benefit to human beings to basically add to the power of the human mind, but it also primarily is something which is used to the benefit of the machines themselves. So what does this mean for the future of transportation? Well, I've tried to illustrate this by comparing the moon landing in 1969 with the most recent landing of Perseverance rover on Mars. So on the left-hand side, 1969, 50 years ago, just over 50 years ago, we saw technology which empowered a human being to land on the surface of the moon. So although it was technology that helped the astronauts in Apollo 11 to be able to get to the moon, it was human beings who actually controlled the descent vehicle and landed it on the surface of the moon. So technology was used in partnership with human beings for that great achievement. Today, of course, there have been a huge number of people and experts involved in the development of the Mars rover. But essentially, once the spacecraft got to Mars, everything else was basically technology empowering technology. It would have been beyond the capabilities of a human crew to have landed that rover safely on the surface of Mars. the computations required, the adjustments, everything about that landing would have been impossible for a human being to have achieved. And so if we look at it like this and compare the technology in 1969 with the technology available in Perseverance today, the picture on the left is Ed Mitchell, who was one of the Apollo 14 astronauts, and he was one of the last people to put a foot onto the moon. And the capsule that brought him back to Earth, you can see underneath this picture. And the reason for the greeting card that you see beside Ed Mitchell's picture, it's an example of a singing birthday card. So in other words, when you open the card, it sings happy birthday. And Ed Mitchell was once asked about the computing power of the technology within his Apollo 14 spacecraft. And he was asked to compare it with the computing power in the little chip that went inside the singing greeting card. And his comment was that the computing power that he had on Apollo 14 was far less than you would find inside that greeting card. And so if you go forward to today, and you think about what is possible now with the remarkable advances in computing power that have enabled us to be transported or to transport goods or objects to another planet millions of miles away. And this would not be possible without artificial intelligence. So what does this mean for the future of transportation? Well, here's a visualization of the inside of a SpaceX space vehicle that's developed by Elon Musk. And you can see some gesture control of the technology. But what actually is the role of human beings in this transportation technology? How much does the vehicle or the transportation vehicle rely on the skill and experience of a human being? And the same is true with this device. If we are transporting goods to different locations, there are already a significant number of drones being used to transport goods to different places. And we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more and more as these devices become more and more intelligent. We will see transportation of goods, transportation of people under the control of artificial intelligence and devices. So what is the role of human beings in this transportation? And this is a visualization of a tube train of the future. And you can bet your life that in the front of that tube train, there will not be a human being, or at least there will be no need for a human being, because everything will be controlled by computers. So what's the connection between these developments in transportation technology and humanity? Has technology eroded humanity? So you take the steam train of 1951, required a lot of skill and experience, several years of apprenticeship and training, a challenge every day that the driver got into one of these steam trains. But with that came a lot of satisfaction and a lot of status because of the role of the human being in that transport technology. Whereas if you look at the tube train on the right, there is no human in there. So what are the challenges? What's the effect of that on those involved in the transportation sector? So It might seem a depressing picture that the artificial intelligence and other technologies are basically now have reached the stage where they are much more powerful beyond the capabilities of human intelligence. And because of this, human beings are not required in a lot of transportation technologies. However, there is another side to the story, and that is that human beings are transported not just physically, but human beings since the dawn of time have been transported virtually. And in the early days, they will be transported by the storytelling of the elders around a campfire. They will be transported to different worlds and different experiences through books when the technology was available. And of course, in the days of radio, which was the medium that was available in my youth, with radio programs like Dick Barton, a special agent, listening to the radio was a way of being transported to a different time and space. And it, like Thomas Cook had in his vision, it enriched the lives of ordinary people. It made these new experiences attractive, accessible, and affordable. And a lot of my love of storytelling actually came from my grandmother, who used to tell me stories about her youth, and so with my grandfather, and this led at school then to a teacher called Mrs. Derbyshire, who used to sit down with her classroom, I think it was on a Tuesday afternoon, and she'd read to us from Biggles. And so we were transported to these new experiences. And as technology has evolved, it's become more and more powerful, attractive, accessible, and affordable, and in many ways more powerful in enriching the lives of ordinary people. And so we've gone from radio to cinema to television, and all of these technologies are forms of transportation technology that take us through time and space to a different experience. But this journey in time and space is in our own mind. And as time has gone by, this is taken from my days at the Serious Games Institute as the founding director there, where in 2007, we had a virtual world model of the Serious Games Institute in Second Life. And what you see on the left-hand side is my avatar, Hobson Hoggard, stood outside a virtual replica of the Serious Games Institute. And we tried very hard in those early days with the limitations of the technology that was available at the time to be able to mix the virtual world with the physical world. And so we use the Serious Games Institute in many ways as a showcase for how virtual transportation technologies were evolving. And this included experiments with mixed reality. So you see on the right-hand side, you see someone sat in the offices at the Serious Games Institute, and there is an avatar sat in the chair next to that person. We also had other experiments within the Serious Games Institute that were exploring the ways of transporting people through immersive technologies to different places. And today, technology has become increasingly sophisticated, and virtual reality headsets like the Oculus Go that I'm wearing on the left-hand side have provided virtual transportation technology that can take us to real worlds, exact videos and photographs of real places and real events. and take us to the heart of those experiences. So we are able to travel through time and space and be able to almost control our journey through the virtual reality headset. And the video on the right-hand side, which I play now, is actually an installation which uses 360-degree video projection on the walls of what used to be a church. And this was a celebration of Van Gogh. So what you're seeing basically are animated sequences based on Van Gogh paintings. So this was a way of transporting the people that you're sat around the walls of this old church to an imaginary world. So if we look at the difference between physical and virtual transportation technologies and how that has an impact on technology and humanity. Well, virtual transportation technologies provide opportunities for human skill, innovation, and creativity in ways of creating the journeys through time and space and making them a mixture of real and fantasy. Whereas if you look at physical transportation technologies as they exist at the moment, they provide smaller and smaller amounts of room for human skill, experience, and ingenuity. And similarly, human control. Yes, we can control our motor cars. We can choose what trains and planes we go on when we come out of lockdown, that is. But that we are limited to, in fact, we're really quite limited, particularly with public transport, in our ability to be able to control the transportation technologies. And likewise, a choice of destinations. If we're looking at physical transportation technology, we are really limited to what you can get to from your current destination. And we're also limited in terms of the level of cost and the time it takes to travel to different places. And on the other hand, physical transportation does allow us to connect with other human beings when we visit other cultures, when we meet other people in different locations. We are building our human-to-human connections in ways which maybe are not at the present time possible through virtual transportation technologies. Virtual transportation technologies overcome the constraints of time and space because you can transfer in a matter of split seconds from one place on the planet to another place. You can transfer from a time, you can go back to a historic event with a virtual reality. If you've recorded in 360 degrees, you can relive that experience and you can get there in a matter of milliseconds, whereas physically you could not revisit many places that no longer exist, obviously. And of course, physical transportation technologies and virtual transportation technologies have different levels of attractiveness, affordability, and accessibility. And in some ways, it's almost ironic that virtual transportation technologies have the capability to give you this freedom of choice, the ability to go where you want and when you want, on demand at very low cost. But is that any more attractive than being physically able to transport yourself to a holiday location, for example, which is going to be less affordable and less accessible, but probably more attractive. So we have to balance the effectively the instant gratification that we get from an ability to be able to go wherever we want, whenever we want, to against the expectation and the excitement that we feel when we're saving for a holiday, or we're planning a trip somewhere, or we're saving our money to have an exciting experience. And so even though it costs more money, it's not available instantly, it's something we look forward to. As human beings, it's an important part of our emotional makeup. So as we come towards the end of this talk, there are a number of things that I would like you to think about. And the first of these is what effect is these quantum changes, what effect is that going to have on human life and the way we live in the future? You know, how will artificial intelligence affect transportation technologies? And how will it affect our lives in the future? We have COVID-19, which I think is building up a pent-up demand to be able to travel physically again. But are we going to be more focused on virtual transportation technologies as a result of the consumerization of digital technologies and the availability of things like virtual reality, all of the technologies, the cocktail of technologies that go together to make this possible? What effect is that going to have on our lives? And what is going to be the role of human beings in transportation, whether it's physical transportation or virtual transportation? My own feeling is that in physical transportation, the vehicles that are going to take us from place to place in future, although they will be more powerful, they will have less and less involvement in the use of human beings in the management and control of those technologies. So I think it's important to balance the needs of us human beings as individuals and the needs of society to be able to develop the quality of life equitably for people around the world. But I think it's important to be able to reflect on the impact of all of these technologies. In today's talk, we've specifically focused on transport technologies, but in the future series of talks, we'll be looking at a range of other technologies and asking the same kind of questions. Are we really in control of our future? Are we managing the direction of life in a positive way? And how is technology either empowering us to be able to do that, or maybe taking control over us rather than us being control over the technology? So today, this is one of the paradoxes of human life. I believe that human life essentially is a paradox. There are so many things that should not exist, or are a contradiction, shall I say, should not exist simultaneously. And today, through virtual reality and other technologies, we can be simultaneously here, as I am in my office in a little village in Northamptonshire in the UK, and we can be there in time and space, and we can be in both places at the same time. So if you are watching this video either live or recorded in a different part of the world, if you're watching it live, I am simultaneously with you, wherever you are, and I'm also here in Northamptonshire. And if you're watching a recording, then I am simultaneously here in Alderton, but also there, whatever time you are watching this in, and wherever you're watching it from. So we've broken the barriers of time and space. You're not constrained by having to watch this live. You can watch a recording. So thank you very much for your time and attention, whether you are watching this live via Facebook Live, or whether you're in a Zoom webinar with me. I thank you very much for joining me.